Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to another Planetarium show. My name is Jessica. I am the director of the Planetarium, and with me tonight are two of our students who I will let introduce themselves, starting with Lindsay.
Hi, I'm Lindsay. I'm a physics graduate student at UMD.
And I'm Eli. I'm a physics undergraduate student at UMD.
So, tonight starts our first of three shows that we are going to be doing this month to celebrate Women's History Month. Um, this week, we'll be looking at the history of spaceflight, all of the amazing women who helped launch us off Earth into space. And then we'll have two other shows over the next 2 weeks as well, which I can tell you more about at the end. But before I hand it over to Lindsay, who's going to be doing our show tonight, if you do have any questions throughout, feel free to leave them down in the comments. Eli and I will be keeping an eye on that, and we'll let Lindsay know as questions come up. We'll also have time at the end to take questions as well. All right, well, Lindsay, over to you.
Okay. Okay, can you guys see the PowerPoint? Okay,
Yep.
just making sure it's on the right screen. Okay, so as Jessica said, today we are going to be looking at some of the women who helped us get into space. So first we're going to start with some women who were at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. You may know it also as JPL. So here were all of the women that were part of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory around the 40s, 50s. And we now know of JPL as, uh, a company that does spaceflight and works with NASA and things like that. But actually, it first started out as a company making rockets into weapons. So these women, they helped figure out like the angles of launch to get the right trajectories for the rockets, calculated how much fuel the rockets would need to get it to go as far as they needed it to go. So they did all of these calculations for the engineers of the rockets. Also, to keep in mind, they all did this with a paper and pencil. There were no actual electric computers at this point. Many had no college degrees. And since JPL was a little bit more casual work environment than like NASA, they think that's partly why they may have been a little more welcoming to the women. But the women still had it kind of hard. They could not watch any of the rocket launches. So they would do all these calculations to help the engineers figure out the right fuel ratios and things like that and angles of launch, and they wouldn't even be able to see if their calculations were right or not. So after that time, um, once we got into the space race, of course, we were trying to beat the Soviet Union into space. America was. This woman right here in this photo, that's Sylvia Lundy, and I'll get more into her in a little bit. So we have this rocket. It's called the Jupiter C rocket. Now, NASA actually didn't want JPL to build the first rocket to go into space because their background was in making weapons, and they thought that wouldn't be a good look for them going forward to use a company that has been making weapons. So instead, they got the Navy to develop a rocket, the Vanguard, but it blew up. And JPL luckily was building this Jupiter C rocket in secret. And so when the Vanguard kind of failed, they were here with their Jupiter C rocket all ready to go. And they were able to get that up into space. And also they were able to put a satellite up into space.
Hey, Jessica, we just got a comment saying the volume is a bit lower than normal. I don't know if you can turn that up through OBS.
Yeah, I saw that. I just boosted it some.
Okay.
Okay, I can try to talk louder too. Okay, so Macy Roberts, she was the supervisor of the Human Computing Group, and it was all women for a couple of reasons. One, Macy wasn't really sure if men would be able to take a woman seriously as their supervisor. She, even among women, she was very particular about who she picked to be part of her computing group because she wanted collaboration to go very well and for everybody to be able to work together very well. And so even if there was a woman that got hired and they just weren't working very well with the group, then they would not make it. So she was the supervisor of the computing group for a few decades, actually. Uh, Barbara Paulson, this is her right over here. She was part of that human computing group. She started in 1948. And she actually was there for 45 years. In this picture, she's getting her 10th anniversary pin. And so she worked on also the Mariner probes, and that went to Venus and Mercury, and also the Viking probe. Inez Lawson is this woman right in the middle here. So she was the first Black person actually at JPL, and she was going to school for engineering. And she happened to see an ad at her school where JPL was looking for human computers. And the ad didn't say anything about needing to have a diploma, a college degree. And so she knew that because it didn't have that qualification, that women probably could apply for this particular job. Because a lot of these women actually didn't have college degrees. They just really loved math. Um, but she had a degree in engineering, and she still really only got to be a human computer at first. She didn't really get to be an engineer. She was one of the first JPL employees also to get sent to a training course at IBM when electronic computers really did start becoming more the norm. Okay, so here's Sylvia Lundy. So she helped calculate the trajectories for the Voyager spacecraft. The Voyager craft, they leave from Earth, they visit Jupiter, and then they fly by Saturn. And then Voyager 1 kind of flies off into space after that. And then after Saturn, Voyager 2 goes off to Uranus and Neptune. So this kind of configuration for the planets was not going to happen um, ever again. So this particular path was pretty easy to get the spacecraft to do in comparison to some other paths anyway. So she got, whoops. So she calculated how close these spacecrafts had to get to Jupiter. The closer they got to Jupiter, the more Jupiter's gravity would pull on those spacecraft and change their trajectory. And so we have this gravitational pull at Jupiter. Then she calculated how far from Saturn they needed to be and to get the right amount of force to then launch Voyager 2 towards Uranus, and then again another. So these are called gravitational assists, the gravity of the planet helping change the path of the spacecraft. And then again, how close to get to Uranus. In order for it to kind of go off on this last path at Neptune. So she figured out all of these trajectories and the timing and everything for all this spacecraft to go and be able to visit all of these planets. And actually, no other spacecraft has visited Uranus or Neptune since. Okay, Sue Finley, she actually is still at NASA. So she started working at at JPL, and then eventually JPL became a part of NASA. And she was one of the women that didn't have a college degree, but she just really loved math and loved numbers. And she worked on the Mariner probes too, which again went to Mars and Venus. And her favorite mission, she says, was Venera, which landed on Venus. But the most current project that she has worked on actually is the Juno spacecraft, which is this picture right here, that arrived at Jupiter not too long ago. So she is still going strong at NASA, still developing things for spacecraft. So next, we're going to talk about the Mercury 13, and they were a group of women who were interested in becoming astronauts during the Apollo program, like when Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong were around. And so this video is going to kind of tell you all the different tests that they went through and kind of why they ended up not being able to be astronauts at that time.
While the Americans were recruiting astronauts, the Soviets continued to rack up firsts in space. In 1963, they launched Valentina Tereshkova, their first female cosmonaut. She flew 48 orbits. At the Lovelace Clinic in New Mexico, a top-secret program was underway to recruit a corps of female astronauts. They were dubbed the Mercury 13. Well, they did extraordinarily well in the tests, and they surpassed the men in some ways. And that was a function of their different body type. And they wound up with 20 or so ladies that were all suitable candidates. And of those 20 or 24 that took the tests, 13 were found to be adequate and appropriate candidates for the space program. It didn't happen because they were 20 years ahead of their time. The program never received any kind of encouragement from NASA. In fact, active steps were taken to quash it. And so the ladies who had been given tremendous stimulation, and they were all very excited about being astronauts, and everybody at Lovelace thought they were going to be astronauts, were suddenly told that they couldn't be. Jerry Cobb and her team were ready and eager to fly when the program was suddenly halted. No explanation was ever given to them, although the orders apparently came from the highest level. I've seen the copy of a memo from Vice President Lyndon Johnson in which he was requiring James Webb to look into the suitability of women as candidates for space. And in Lyndon Johnson's handwriting across the bottom, instead of a signature, was the phrase, "Let's put a stop to this now." And that apparently was the death knell of the Mercury 13's aspirations to go into space. Most of them never knew about this till years later, but they never gave up. To this day, they still are looking for a ride. They want to go in space.
There's no difference in capability of pilots, whether women or men. But the problem was there were no women with experience in research and development. You pick the guys with experience in research and development, and that's just a smart way of doing it.
Valentina Tereshkova would be the last woman in space until Sally Ride boarded an American space shuttle 2 decades later. By the end of 1963, the total number of astronauts had risen to 30. They'd all be vying for the 20 available seats on Gemini.
So As was mentioned in the video, one of the reasons that these women couldn't be astronauts is they didn't have experience in research and development as test pilots. And part of the reason that there weren't any female test pilots is because they weren't allowed in the military at that time. And so there was no way for women to become test pilots in the military at the time, which then prevented them from becoming astronauts. Okay, now we are going to take a look at sorry, my window. Okay.
I'm only seeing a white screen right now. There we go.
Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at some hidden figures that were behind the scenes at NASA during this time. So you may have heard of these women, especially if you have seen the movie Hidden Figures. So this is Dorothy Vaughan, Katherine Johnson, and Mary Jackson. Dorothy Vaughan was a mathematician and a human computer that worked for NASA. She was part of the West Area Computers, which is a group of African American mathematicians. And so she was she was the supervisor of that group. And then eventually, of course, they started getting electronic computers at NASA. And so she saw that her group would kind of end up being not needed after we had these electric computers. And so she trained herself and also all of the women that worked for her in this new computer technology that was showing up at NASA and ended up being an expert in it. Katherine Johnson was another mathematician. She helped calculate some of the trajectories for the first Apollo missions. And she was so good at being accurate for her calculations that when NASA first got those electronic computers, she would actually check if the electronic computers were computing correctly because she was so trustworthy with that. And then Mary Jackson, she was ended up becoming an engineer, the first female Black engineer at NASA. And she kept rising up in NASA's hierarchy until she became she went to the highest position that an engineer could possibly be at NASA. And now she kind of works there in the affirmative action program, trying to influence more diversity in science and STEM. So Katherine Johnson actually has a building named after her now at NASA. And here on the right, she is getting her Congressional Medal from Obama. And then Mary Jackson, this happened, I think, in the last year. She has a building named after her now also. And this one is in Washington, D.C. So this next woman, Margaret Hamilton, it was her computer code that actually helped the Apollo missions land on the moon. And she is just really fun to listen to. And this is one of my favorite videos as she has some fun stories. And so I'm gonna let her talk to you about her experiences there.
They announced that they were looking for people to do programming to send man to the moon. And I just thought, wow, I've got to go there. I grew up in the Midwest, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, Upper Peninsula. I just enjoyed school, but there was something about math that I just liked more than everything else. I liked deriving the answers because I didn't want to memorize. It was too much. I was lazy. When my husband was in law school, they wanted the law wives, my being one of them, to pour tea. And I said to my husband, no way am I pouring tea. As a Harvard law wife, if I go to Harvard Law School, fine, I'll do what the men do, but I'm not going to be put in that position. And he was very proud of me that I had taken that stand. They announced that they were looking for people to do programming to send man to the moon. I was the first programmer they hired. I came up with the term software engineering, and it was considered a joke. What? Software is engineering? Mostly men were working there, and they had somebody at home to take care of their kids. I had no choice. I'd bring my daughter, Lauren, into work nights and weekends, and she'd see me playing astronaut to test the software and doing the kinds of things the astronaut would do. So she wanted to do it too, so she played astronaut. And all of a sudden, everything came crashing on the simulator. And I realized that what she had done is that she selected the pre-launch program during flight. I said, oh my God, this is not good. We really need to put a protection in there because the astronaut really could do what she did by mistake. I tried to get it through MIT, NASA. No, they said, astronauts are trained never to make a mistake. There was an emergency. Everything happened that we thought would happen if they made the mistake. So then there was a decision, go, no go, land or don't land. Fortunately, the people at Mission Control trusted our software and they said, go, go, go. The software and the hardware worked perfectly. The software was on the ground and on the moon.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Your example speaks of the American spirit of discovery that exists in every little girl and little boy who know that somehow to look beyond the heavens is to look deep within ourselves.
Being fearless, even when the experts say, no, it doesn't make sense, they didn't believe it. Nobody did. It was something that we were dreaming of happening, but it became real.
Yeah, so I never get sick of that video. I love Margaret Hamilton. Why does that keep happening? Sorry. Did the screen go blank again?
Nope, we're good.
We can see it.
Okay, so Joanne Morgan, she was the only woman in mission control during the Apollo missions. And so you can see her in a sea of men kind of in the middle here on the picture on the left. And then here she is on the right. She also did not have a degree in engineering at first, like many of the other women. And so she was actually working with the precursor to NASA before it was called NASA and before we were trying to get into space. And she was so good at engineering there, even though she didn't have the degree, that she was recommended to NASA as someone that should be a part of the Apollo program. So she, yeah, she was the only woman there during the Apollo missions. And eventually she became an instrumentation engineer. And eventually, again, all this without her college degree, eventually she did get her degree in engineering. She did face quite a lot of discrimination. She'd be in the mission control room, and then men would tell her to leave because they didn't think that there would be a female engineer. She also got some sexist comments, unfortunately, but luckily she had some really good supervisors that defended her and helped her be successful. Poppy Northcutt, she was
Okay, it didn't change for me.
Yeah, it's still on the. There you go.
Will that help? Okay. So Poppy Northcutt, she was the only woman in mission control during the Apollo 8 mission. She eventually earned her degree in mathematics and was part of the human computing group at NASA. And so eventually she calculated the calculations for bringing the Apollo 8 astronauts back home. So some of the other mathematicians worked on the trajectory to get men up into space. She worked on calculating the trajectory to get them back down to Earth. Ethel Heineke Bauer, she helped save the Apollo 13 astronauts. There was a time
It didn't change again.
Why is this happening?
Yeah, I don't know what's going on.
Is that
No. Do you just want to try resharing? Oh, there it went.
so? There was a point not too long ago, like in the 90s, where everybody had heard of Apollo 13 and knew what that was because of the movie. But now I realize we're probably far enough removed from that movie coming out that not everybody knows Apollo 13 anymore. So anyway, Apollo 13 happened to have some problems in their space flight, and they didn't actually end up being able to land on the moon. And so because they weren't landing on the moon and collecting rocks, and they didn't have that extra mass added to their spacecraft, they had to recalculate trajectories because originally those trajectories obviously had accounted for those moon rocks coming back with the astronauts. So she helped calculate these trajectories to get those Apollo 13 astronauts home safely. And of course, they did end up landing back on Earth safely. Margaret Brennicke, she was a materials engineer. She worked at the Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama. She had an extensive knowledge of aluminum alloys, and so she was helping her peers, the other engineers, kind of figuring out what types of metals and what type of materials would be best to survive in space and also survive the liftoff into space. Barbara Crawford Johnson, she was an aeronautical engineer. She also worked on the trajectory to bring Apollo astronauts back down to Earth. Billy Robertson, she worked closely with rocket pioneer Werner von Braun. So Werner von Braun, he was from Germany initially, and he came to the United States, and he pretty much helped advance the rocket technology to the point of where it had gotten to for the Apollo missions. So he's, again, kind of known as the father of rocketry. So she helped develop some of the guidance software for some of the first computer models for the launches that were going on for the Apollo program. Judy Sullivan, she was kind of a biomedical person. She worked with the sensors that the astronauts had in their suits that would beam back messages letting everybody know that if any of their vitals were off. So she was monitoring that during the space flights of the Apollo astronauts. She wasn't in mission control because all of these engineers that were working with the medical sensors, they were kind of off in a different room, but she was there during the launches. And a woman that I very recently heard of, Mary Golda Ross, was also around during this time, and she was the first Native American female engineer at NASA. So here's a little bit about her.
Mary Golda Ross was the first known Native American female engineer and the first female engineer in the history of Lockheed. She was one of the 40 founding engineers of the renowned and highly secretive Skunk Works project at Lockheed Corporation. Mary was a dedicated Lockheed employee from 1942 until her retirement in 1973. During her 31 years at the company, she was best remembered for her work on aerospace design, including the Agena rocket program. Mary also worked on numerous design concepts for interplanetary space travel, manned and unmanned Earth orbiting flights, and the earliest studies of orbiting satellites for both defense and civilian purposes. Born in the small town of Park Hill, Oklahoma, Mary was the great-great-granddaughter of Cherokee Chief John Ross, who led the Cherokee people on their arduous trail of tears. She was a talented child, and by age 20, earned a bachelor degree in mathematics from Northeastern State Teachers College and received her master's degree from the Colorado State Teachers College. She moved to California to begin her career at Lockheed as a mathematician. By the late 1960s, Mary became a senior advanced systems staff engineer, working on the Polaris reentry vehicle, Poseidon, and Trident missiles. After retiring in 1973, Mary continued to encourage women and Native American youth to pursue careers in math and engineering. She was inducted into the Silicon Valley Engineering Hall of Fame in 1992 and was a Society of Women Engineers Fellow. Mary died in April 2008, several months before her 100th birthday, and left a $400,000 endowment to the National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C. Tonight, we honor Mary Golda Ross with her induction into the Women in Aviation International Pioneer Hall of Fame.
So it's just been really exciting to kind of learn about new women pretty much every time I do this show. So we have our first female in space, Valentina Tereshkova. She was part of the...
It's doing it again.
What I keep hitting.
For some reason, it doesn't like it when you play the videos, it seems.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's it. Okay.
There
Yep.
we go.
So this was in June 16th, 1963. To this day, she is still the youngest woman in space at age 26, and she is still the only woman to have made a solo space flight. Svetlana Savitskaya, also with the Soviet Union, her mission was July 19th, 1982. She was the first woman on a space station, the first woman to do a spacewalk, and the first woman to do 2 space flights. In America, our first female astronaut was, of course, Sally Ride in 1983. So the astronauts that I'm going to talk to you about today were part of the shuttle era at NASA. If you want to learn kind of about some of the astronauts that are currently working with NASA, that will be in the show coming up in 2 weeks from now. So Catherine D. Sullivan, her mission was October 5th, 1984. She was the first American woman to perform a spacewalk. Shannon Lucid in 1985, she was the first Chinese-born woman in space and the first woman to do at least 3 space flights. Millie Hughes Fulford, she was the first female payload specialist in 1991. Eileen Collins in 1999, she was the first female space shuttle commander. Peggy Whitson, she was the oldest female spacewalker at age 47. So she started out as an astronaut during the space shuttle program, but she actually is still going up into space with NASA astronauts, just not on the shuttles anymore. And so she ended up, again, being the oldest female spacewalker. And as of April 24th, 2017, she spent the longest cumulative amount of time in space spent by any NASA astronaut, male or female, 665 total days in space. And that comes in 8th place for time in space among all astronauts around the world. If you want to learn more about some of these women, Rise of the Rocket Girls is about the women who were calculating things over at JPL. Galaxy Girls is another good book. And then there are a couple of books and also a documentary on Netflix about the Mercury 13.
Come on, camera. There we go. Very cool. Yeah, I like seeing the new additions.
Yeah.
Like, that's awesome. I do like that we, as we continue to do this, continue to learn and find more. It's amazing how many women have had 0 credit for the work that they've done.
Yeah.
I mean, computing that stuff by hand, it's crazy.
Mhm.
But, all right. Well, thank you, Lindsay. My hair out of my face. I am not seeing any questions at the moment, but if anyone has questions, now is a great time to leave them down in the comments. I will give a minute or so to see if any questions come in. And while we do that, let me tell you what you can expect over the next week. So on Saturday, we are going to take you on a tour of the moons of the solar system. There's a lot of cool ones out there. And then next Wednesday, the second part of our Women's History Month series is going to be the history of astronomy. So we'll look at specifically astronomers and not engineers or those involved with, launching us into space. And a lot of these women date back like really, really far. It's kind of crazy. And then next Saturday, we'll have another edition of Ask an Astronomer where you have questions and we will hopefully have answers for you. So a lot of fun stuff coming up over the next week. And then as Lindsay said, 2 weeks from now will be the third and final part of our Women's History Month, which will be current women in astronomy and STEM, the work that they are currently doing. Who also still don't always get the recognition that they deserve. So yeah, we'll be rounding that off. And then I don't think we've decided what we're doing Saturday 2 weeks from now. I have an idea of what I'd like to do. I don't know if I should tease it. I haven't even told you guys yet. Because we're wanting to do that exploration series, and I know we've gotten some requests. So I'm kind of thinking maybe we do black holes in 2 weeks.
That'd be fun.
Yeah. Been wanting to do that show for a while. But, all right. Well, I am not seeing questions. Eli, I know sometimes you see some that I don't.
Nope, not seen any.
No? All right. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us. Thank you, Lindsay, for an awesome show. Again, check back with us every week, and we'll be doing more in this series. We also just regularly have shows on Wednesdays and Saturdays at 7. We are slowly working on getting some more in-person stuff going. We are going to have a kind of modified astronomy day coming up in May, which more details will be coming out soon on that. And then we're hoping sometime this summer to be able to open to small private groups in person, but information will come out on our website and social media as we are able to start doing that. There's still a lot to plan, still a lot, but we're working on it. We're trying to get you guys back in. Um,
Oh,
oh,
we did just get a question.
yeah.
Did the astronauts get to message or call home from space? I'm assuming that's the Apollo astronauts.
Oh. So they only communicated with mission control, so they weren't actually able to call their families directly to tell them their spacecraft was in trouble, unfortunately. But their families probably learned about it from mission control or on the news.
Yeah, I know a lot of families are always there for launches and stuff and returns. I'm fairly certain. I feel like I've heard that they got to come into mission control and at least see a video message.
From the Apollo astronauts?
Yeah, but I'm not sure. I may be completely making that up.
The only thing I know about it is what was in First Man, the movie with Ryan Gosling. So I'm trying to dig back, but it's been a couple of years. The only thing I remember is that when he got back, they quarantined the astronauts to make sure they didn't have any moon germs on them.
Yeah.
So there's a really stereotypical meeting through the glass scene. That's what I remember.
I haven't seen that movie yet.
It was really good.
But yeah, so I guess short answers, we're not sure.
Yep. I guess I could have also just looked it up, I suppose. God, I'm making every type of possible.
I mean, because I know that they had videos. They constantly were making videos and sending them. So
I'm sure their families got to see those, though.
yeah, I would be surprised if they didn't.
I do know that who was the president at the time? Was it Nixon? He got to talk to astronauts that were on the moon. While they were walking on the moon, there was a phone call.
That's pretty cool.
I think it was Nixon. Yeah, it was Nixon.
All right. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. Cool question. All right. Well, again, thank you, everyone. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening, and we'll see you again next time. Bye.
Bye.